Sometimes crimes are completely unpredictable, and there's no way anybody could have expected the terrible events to happen. But many people have attempted to warn others and authorities about dangerous individuals who go on to commit horrifying crimes. Number 10. Some of the most disturbing cases are those where the victim tried to warn people about the dangerous situation they were in. It's unfortunately not uncommon for the victims of domestic violence to attempt to alert people about a dangerous individual, only for those warnings to go unanswered. The case of Tanya Moore and Mark Deitch was one example. Tanya was a talented show jumper who loved horses. She met Deitch at a farmer's ball, and the pair bonded over an interest in country sports. He was a digger driver, and according to reports, came from a different world to Tanya, but they still had a connection. It was a whirlwind romance. After meeting in 2002, they soon became engaged, but Tanya had noticed that Deitch was controlling and jealous. In February of 2003, she called off the engagement. That should have been the end of any contact Tanya had with her former partner, but it was the beginning of a horror story that ended in a horrifying attack. On March 29, 2004, Tanya was driving home when someone crashed into her car. She came to a stop and a familiar figure approached the driver's side door. Deitch broke the car window and opened fire at point-blank range. He then forced Tanya's car off the road, attempting to make the whole scene look like a tragic accident. When Tanya's body was discovered by passers-by, it was clear something more deliberate had happened. It didn't take the police long to figure out who was behind the crime either. Tanya herself had sent them a dossier of all the threats Deitch had made over the past year. Ever since Tanya had broken up with him, Deitch had been stalking and harassing her. He'd warned off any other man that she spoke to and spread lies about Tanya stealing from him. The stalking continued even after Deitch started a new relationship, and even borrowed money from his new girlfriend to continue tormenting Tanya. Deitch was soon arrested. He tried to claim that he'd spent the entire day with his girlfriend and even pleaded not guilty in court. But the jury saw through his alibi, and he was found guilty, and he'll spend the rest of his life behind bars. Number 9. Charles Manson is one of the most infamous and dangerous people to have ever lived. While he didn't himself physically commit the crimes attached to his name, his orders led to the loss of at least 9 victims, and possibly many more. It's hard to know just how much of the Manson family crimes could have been predicted, but Manson's own mother tried to warn people early on about just how dangerous her son was. Kathleen Maddox was still a teenager when she gave birth to Manson. She'd rebelled from a strict Christian family and became pregnant by a man she met at a dance. She didn't remain with Manson's biological father, and his surname actually came from the man that Maddox married around the time of his birth. Maddox continued to get into trouble after Manson was born. When he was just 5 years old, she was imprisoned for an attempted robbery she committed with her brother. Manson was sent to live with relatives and was forced to visit her in prison. When she was released, she took her son back into her care and they moved from one rundown room to another as Maddox tried to find stability. Even at an early age, Manson was getting into trouble with the law himself. His mother noticed his antisocial behavior, but couldn't stay in control of her son. At one point, she applied to the court to have him fostered, but this was rejected. He was instead sent to a Catholic boys' home, where Maddox hoped that he would get the support and stability that he needed. He ran away after just 10 months, and the rest of his childhood was spent moving from one institution to another. His crimes continued, and he faced the court multiple times. Officials at reform institutions also noticed Manson's antisocial behavior, chronic lying, and a lack of general attachment. There was clearly something wrong with this young man, but warnings about his mental state simply went unnoticed. It was years later, in the summer of 1968, that the foundations of the cult known as the Manson family started to take shape. He took advantage of young people and the counterculture movement of the era. Reflecting years later, Manson commented that his own mother had been a lot like the people that he recruited, and he described her as a flower child, born decades too early, and she was rebelling in the same way as the young people who joined his so-called family. Number 8. Many people would consider Mary Ann Smith a friend and trusted advisor. They had no idea she was a con artist, wanted internationally for stealing tens of thousands of dollars. By the time they realized that they were also the victims of scams, Smith would disappear. It was only after one of her victims tried to warn people about her that she was finally caught. In 2013, Smith moved into an apartment complex in Los Angeles. It was there she met Jonathan Walton, a TV producer who lived in that same complex. They became friends, bonding over the fact that they both had family problems. Smith claimed to be the heir of a wealthy Irish family, but her relatives back in Ireland were trying to stop her from getting her inheritance. At first, Smith showered Walton and his husband with gifts. When she asked for money, she quickly returned it. But over time, loans went unrepaid, and Walton lost more and more money. After years of friendship, Smith claimed her inheritance was finally coming through. She just needed to pay $54,000 in fees to release it. Walton only had $4,000 to his name, but gave this to Smith and let her put the rest on his credit card. A few weeks later, Smith claimed she was going to prison for a money laundering sentence, another trick pulled by her relatives. This was the first time Walton was able to call her out on the lie. Going through prison records, he found she was actually serving time for grand theft. She'd stolen thousands of dollars from her employer, and the last loan Walton had sent her was related to that. When Smith was released from prison, Walton confronted her about the lies. The same day, Smith disappeared. Walton reported the con to the police, but knew he couldn't stop there. He didn't want anybody else to fall for her tricks. He started a blog about Smith, calling her the Queen of Cons, and began to look into her background. She had claimed to be Irish by birth, but Walton discovered this wasn't true. Through his blog, he also learned of countless other victims. Smith's cons ranged from pretending to be a psychiatrist to a psychic to being a cancer patient. She even pretended to be Jennifer Aniston to support one of her cons. Between all her victims, she made tens of thousands of dollars, which allowed her to live a wealthy lifestyle. Walton's reporting eventually led to Smith's capture and conviction, but she would only spend 2 years in prison before being released again. She vanished, but there were still crimes she needed to pay for. Before she'd met Walton, Smith lived in Northern Ireland, where she scammed clients while pretending to be a mortgage advisor. She was still wanted for this crime. Walton continued to raise awareness, and a tip came through his website with Smith's location. She was living in Bingham, Maine, as if nothing had happened. The tip led to Smith's arrest again, and she was sent to Northern Ireland, where she was once again found guilty in 2024 and sentenced to 2 more years in prison. Number 7. Lauren McCluskey was a senior at the University of Utah with her whole life ahead of her when a man who lied about his identity forced her into his car and took her life. The horrifying crime took place after 2 weeks of harassment and 2 weeks of Lauren trying to warn the police that something bad was going to happen. Lauren was a 21-year-old track athlete majoring in communications in 2018. In September of her senior year, she met 37-year-old Melvin Rowland at a local bar where he was working as a bouncer. Rowland lied to her about his name and age and kept his identity a secret as they started a relationship. He had a criminal past and was actually out on parole at the time. A friend warned Lauren that Rowland was lying to her, and she learned the truth about his dark history. She invited Rowland to her student accommodation, where she confronted him about the lies and broke up with him. At first, it seemed like they may have been on good terms. Rowland slept at her home that night, and she lent him her car to get home. But Lauren quickly realized she was unsafe. The first contact she had with the campus police came the day after she broke up with him. She needed to get her car but was worried about going alone. A university escort went with her to pick up the vehicle, and Rowland didn't attempt to approach her. Over the next 9 days, Lauren contacted the campus police multiple times. He and his friends sent disturbing messages and then began extorting her for money. The police didn't dismiss Lauren's complaints and warnings, but they didn't appear to be in a rush to act on them. After days without hearing anything from the campus police, Lauren tried going to the local authorities in the hopes that someone would listen to her warnings. The harassment now even included messages from someone pretending to be a police officer, trying to lure Lauren from her home. On October 22nd, the same day as the spoofed text message, Lauren was attacked. Her parents were on the phone with her, listening as she talked and walked in her apartment parking lot. Suddenly, they heard Roland's voice and Lauren telling him to stop. She dropped the phone, and it was the last time that anyone would hear from her. Roland forced Lauren into the back seat of the car that he'd driven to the university. He didn't drive anywhere, though. Instead, he opened fire, striking Lauren with multiple bullets and leaving her to pass away. Lauren's family believed that the events of October 22nd could have been prevented, and training has now been put into place at the University of Utah to make sure things like this never happen again. Number 6. For decades, the work of Mazer Mahmoud made front-page news for the tabloid newspaper he worked for. His investigations were crucial to putting people behind bars. But in 2014, the collapse of a trial exposed his own criminal activities. Mahmoud was an investigative reporter who worked for the Rupert Murdoch's News of the World and other titles under the News UK umbrella. Most of his work involved sting operations that caught people engaging in illegal activity. His evidence would be handed over to the police shortly before the story was published in the Sunday newspaper. Most of his stories involved things like minor celebrities agreeing to supply illegal substances in return for job opportunities that Mahmoud claimed he could supply. He worked undercover, and as his photo was never published alongside his work, none of his victims had any idea who they were talking to. Other crimes exposed included sports people agreeing to fix games. There were a few more high-profile crimes, including a plot to kidnap Victoria Beckham and a group of individuals looking for radioactive material to make a weapon. Both crimes were far more dangerous than anything else Mahmoud had worked on, and his exposés should have been crucial to putting dangerous criminals behind bars. But in both crimes, the cases collapsed. In the Beckham case, it was discovered that the News of the World had paid a large sum of money to an informant, which helped to undermine his testimony. After the case collapsed, one of the defendants sued the newspaper for libel and won. But even after this, Mahmoud continued his sting operations. His final would be against the singer Tulisa Kantostavlos. It was in 2014 when Mahmoud approached Kantostavlos, pretending to be a film producer. He claimed he was making a Bollywood film about a woman from the ghetto trying to become an R&B star, and thought that she'd be the star. He secretly filmed the singer acting the part of a girl from the ghetto, and pressured her to get illegal substances for him. When she did, this was published, and she was then arrested for the crime. In court, Kantostavlos claimed that she'd been reluctant to get involved in anything involving illegal substances, but Mahmoud and his driver's testimony disagreed. It was then discovered that Mahmoud's driver's statement had been altered. Mahmoud had persuaded him to change his statement after they realized it supported Kantostavlos' claim. Mahmoud had denied doing this, but the record was clear. The case against her was dropped, and the next court case he would be involved in was against himself. In 2015, he was found guilty of conspiring to pervert the course of justice. In the trial, his methods in sting operations were laid out. Many of his victims had accused him of entrapment, and it was clear that this was true. He'd altered testimony and evidence to make sure convictions happened. His motivations were also called into question, and it was clear that putting away dangerous criminals was not a priority for him. More important was just getting that front-page story. After the trial, other victims brought civil cases against Mahmoud and his employer, but it also emerged that the police and the News of the World had been warned about his behavior years before. Mahmoud had a team of helpers in his investigations. In 2003 and 2005, one of these went to the police to attempt to highlight Mahmoud's dangerous activity. He claimed Mahmoud routinely set people up and was potentially acting illegally. These warnings were ignored, and the police continued to use Mahmoud as a crucial witness in prosecutions. In 2006, the politician George Galloway had also attempted to warn the public about the journalist. Galloway had been the subject of an attempted sting operation, where Mahmoud attempted to get him to accept illegal donations, as well as support bigoted comments. Galloway refused and later brought his concerns to the police and the Speaker of the House of Commons. Mahmoud was allowed to continue his activities for another decade before his actions finally caught up to him. Number 5. On May 24th, 2024, Mike Bombara arrived at the home of Jennifer Patelchitz, looking for his estranged wife. When he discovered his wife wasn't there, Bambara took the lives of Jennifer and her daughter, Gretel. It was a horrifying attack, but one Bambara's daughter believed could have been prevented. According to Bambara's daughter, Ariel, her father was controlling and coercive. She'd worried about her mother's safety for years, and in March of that year, finally convinced her to escape the horrifying marriage. After 8 weeks, the mother and daughter managed to get an apartment away from Bambara, but they were still worried about their safety. Bambara had a collection of weapons. These were all legally held, and some were collector's items. Ariel and her mother planned for what they would do if he came to them with those weapons, and tried to seek help from the authorities. Ariel went to the police multiple times, warning them of the danger Bambara posed, and trying to get some kind of protection. The two women received an escort when they went to get their belongings from the family home, but little else was done. According to Ariel, their concerns were dismissed, and they were left to fend for themselves. After weeks of living in fear of what Bambara might do, Bambara proved they were right to fear him. Jennifer Petelchitz was Ariel's mother's best friend. She'd agreed to help the two women when they escaped Bambara, but they never imagined that she might also become his victim. On May 24th, Bambara arrived at the Petelchitz home carrying a weapon and demanding to see his wife. Jennifer tried to tell him that his wife wasn't there, but he didn't believe her. She managed to call Ariel and her mother, and they listened in fear as Jennifer told Gretel to go and hide. She told Bambara to put his weapon away and tried to calm him down, but couldn't stop him from opening fire. Ariel heard the sound of 2 bullets being fired before the call dropped. By the time police arrived, Jennifer and 18-year-old Gretel had already passed away. Bambara's body was also found at the crime scene. Number 4. Carl Eugene Watts isn't the most well-known name in true crime, but the Michigan man may be the most prolific serial killer in American history. Exactly how many lives he took remains a mystery to this day, but it's estimated that at least 80 people lost their lives to him. But long before he was caught, a psychiatrist warned about just how dangerous he might be. Watts was a dangerous man who targeted women, primarily those walking alone in the early hours of the morning. His motivation for these attacks was never obvious, and why he chose one woman but not others has never been revealed. According to Watts, he saw evil in their eyes, which motivated him to attack. Most of the time he didn't steal anything from them, and usually left them to be found. His various methods of attack, along with the fact that he didn't leave DNA evidence behind, made it difficult to connect one crime to another, or any of the crimes to him. Over the course of a year, between 1979 and 1980, Watts took the lives of at least 5 women in the Detroit region. Police in Ann Arbor finally began to believe the crimes were connected due to the fact that they all took place on Sunday mornings and all the victims fit a similar profile. The attacks made local news and were watched by Sergeant James Arthur of the Detroit Police Department. Arthur called the Ann Arbor police with a name they should look into. 11 years earlier, Arthur had been investigating a case involving a teenage Watts. Watts had a paper route, and on June 25, 1969, something in him snapped while he was working. He knocked on the door of one of his regular customers, Joanne Gave. As soon as Joanne opened the door, Watts began beating her. He continued the attack until Joanne screamed, and then he ran away. After getting far enough away, Watts continued his delivery route like nothing had even happened. It wasn't long before he was caught, and when asked why he committed the crime, he simply said he felt like beating someone up. He was taken to a mental hospital and underwent a psychiatric evaluation. According to psychiatrist Dr. Gary Ainsworth, they were looking at a potentially very dangerous individual. This doctor's warnings were not listened to. When exactly Watts began taking lives is unknown, but in 1980, he was already a serial offender. His name was given to the Ann Arbor police, but the attacks continued. Michigan police eventually began to hone in on Watts, but when he realized he was under suspicion, he fled to Houston, Texas. The city had a problem with violent crimes. Even though Michigan police tried to warn their counterparts in Texas, Watts's crimes were able to blend in with other attacks in Houston. It wasn't until one of his victims, Melinda Aguilar, managed to escape and raise the alarm that he was finally caught. In one interview with the police, Watts claimed that there weren't enough fingers and toes in the courtroom to count all the people whose lives he had taken. There were 4 people in the room at the time, leading police to believe that at least 80 people lost their lives at his hands. Watts passed away in prison, and the true extent of his crimes may never be known. Number 3. On November 18th, 1978, over 900 people lost their lives at an agricultural settlement in Guyana. It was a horrifying end to a cult that had been earning criticism for years before disaster struck. The event came at the call of one man, the charismatic and disturbing temple leader, Jim Jones. 6 months earlier, Deborah Layton attempted to warn the public about the paranoid and dangerous man and what might happen at Jonestown. Deborah first became involved with the People's Temple while she was still a teenager. She'd been a rebellious child, and at 16, she was sent to a boarding school in England. At 17, she returned to the US for a vacation with her boyfriend and learned about the cult. She met with Jim Jones in San Francisco, and he told her that he felt an energy that even her parents didn't know she had. It was the kind of persuasion tactics that helped Jones draw in hundreds of followers. At the time, Deborah saw joining the People's Temple like joining the Peace Corps. There'd been some exposés and defections in the past, but nothing she saw in San Francisco turned her off. It appeared to be nothing more than a progressive religious movement that just wanted to make the world a better place. Deborah's family noticed an improvement in her life, and her mother and at least one sibling also joined the People's Temple. At the age of 20, Deborah was made a financial secretary and was trusted by Jones to represent the cult internationally. She traveled to Europe and Panama to set up bank accounts where Jones could stash the money that his followers gave him. Another exposé in 1977, Jim Jones relocated to Guyana, where followers had set up an agricultural commune. This would soon become known as Jonestown and was the new home to the cult. Over time, more and more Americans followed Jones to Guyana, including Deborah. Deborah's mother had cancer, and Jones convinced her that the settlement had excellent medical facilities that would help treat her. When the Laytons arrived, they found something very different. Their clothes, medication, and all their personal belongings were taken from them. They were given a handful of clothes and sent to work in the fields. Most of the followers were also working in the fields, and they spent 11 hours a day doing so. The commune wasn't self-sustaining, and there was little food to go around. Elderly residents were denied their medication, and sickness frequently swept through the community. Jones had become incredibly paranoid of defectors. Loudspeakers were placed around Jonestown so he could speak directly to his followers about his concerns. Sometimes these speeches would go on for hours, even when people were trying to speak. Heavy punishments were given out to anybody seen breaking the rules, and leaving Jonestown was forbidden except when on missions. Occasionally, outsiders would come to visit Jonestown, and during that time, extra food was given out, and work days were shorter. Followers all had to pretend that everything was okay, keeping the secret of the atrocities that took place there. In late spring 1980, Deborah got herself sent to Georgetown, the Guyanese capital. She was able to contact relatives back in the States, who sent tickets so she could return home. At the U.S. Embassy, she revealed everything about the situation in Jonestown, including regular drills to prepare the group for the end. Her testimony was published in the U.S. and helped the relatives of Jonestown residents in their push for something to be done. Her words helped Congressman Leo Ryan decide to travel to Jonestown to see for himself. It was this visit that would ultimately trigger the disaster. Followers attacked the congressman's plane as he tried to leave with defectors and reporters. Fearing retaliation, Jones called for the immediate extinguishing of life at Jonestown. It was the enactment of drills Deborah had warned about. Over 900 people, including Jones, lost their lives, cementing Jones's place as one of the most dangerous men in history. Number 2. Derek Todd Lee, the Baton Rouge serial killer, murdered at least 7 women and attempted to kill 2 others in Louisiana between 1998 and 2003. Police could have caught him sooner, but they ignored multiple warnings. Colette Dwyer, whom Lee had stalked in 1999, filed a complaint leading to his probation and a 9-month prison sentence after he violated it. He was released in January of 2000, and then his attacks continued. Lee's name surfaced early in the investigation due to prior encounters with the police, but he was dismissed because a witness described the killer as white. Lee was black. Colette repeatedly tipped off police after connecting the crimes to her former stalker, but her warnings were ignored. Eventually, advanced DNA technology revealed the killer was, as mentioned, not white. Tips about Lee were finally taken seriously. DNA from an earlier investigation confirmed that he was the killer, and a manhunt finally resulted in his capture in Atlanta in May of 2003. Lee never confessed, but was convicted of 2 of his crimes. He passed away in prison, leaving the full extent of his crimes unknown, many of which could have been avoided if Colette had just been believed all those years ago. Number 1. Dr. Harold Shipman is remembered as one of the most prolific serial killers of all time. Between 1975 and 1998, he claimed the lives of at least 250 patients who were supposed to be under his care. His main motive for this was finances, but it was the false amendment of the will of his last victim that finally led to his capture. But this could have happened months earlier if the fears of a whistleblower had been listened to. Shipman's modus operandi was to target elderly and vulnerable patients. He would prescribe them heavy doses of medication, which would prove to be fatal, then amend medical records to make the passing look like the result of natural causes. His victims were typically cremated, and a second doctor would need to sign off on this before it could happen. Shipman operated a solo practice, but would typically ask the doctors of a neighboring practice to co-sign these requests. To try to avoid suspicion, he rotated which doctors he spoke to, trying to hide just how many requests he was making. In 1998, Dr. Linda Reynolds was a new doctor at this practice. She was added to Shipman's list of doctors to request co-sign forms. At first, she didn't think much of it, but as more and more requests for cremation came through, she began to suspect something was wrong. There were 2 possibilities. The first was that she was being asked to sign cremation requests for patients who didn't exist. Doctors could receive payments for signing these requests, and Shipman might have been signing fake requests for money. The other possibility was more disturbing. All the requests were real. It suggested that the number of patients Shipman had lost was exceptionally high, much higher than should have been the case. Reynolds wasn't the only person to notice just how high that rate was. Other doctors and even funeral home staff shared rumors and jokes about Shipman's negative record. In March of 1998, Reynolds made the decision to go to the authorities about her concerns. According to her husband, she was convinced that Shipman was taking the lives of his patients. What she didn't know was whether this was intentional or if they were victims of simple malpractice. She hoped that an inquiry into the passings would help answer this question and get to the bottom of the mystery. It was later pointed out that the police didn't look at earlier records, which would have shown that Shipman had tampered with them after taking the lives of his patients. They also didn't look at whether Shipman had a criminal or general medical counsel record. No families of any patients were contacted, and none of the patients who'd been buried were exhumed. The investigation closed and Shipman was allowed to continue practicing. If a more extensive investigation had taken place at this time, it's possible some of Shipman's later victims could have been saved. Thankfully, it wouldn't be long before her suspicions were vindicated. In September of 1998, the family of his last victim, Kathleen Grundy, discovered that Shipman was the sole beneficiary of her will. That didn't fit Kathleen's character, and an investigation found that that will had been forged. This started a new investigation that revealed Dr. Reynolds had been right to be suspicious. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.